Android Sue Time Travels Through. Chapter 5. It took only an hour for Sue and Trina to get to the apartment building where Debbie lived. They left Siberia tied to the skateboard in the shadow of some bushes in front of the building, set down an open can of tuna in front of her, and hoped that would keep the cat occupied until they came back. They climbed up the fire escape on the side of the apartment building and entered Debbie's apartment through an open window with a loose screen. Inside the apartment, it was dark, and no one seemed to be home. Sue went to the girls' room, while Trina listened at the front door for anyone coming back. After some searching, Sue found her jumpsuit in a pile of broken, dusty toys under the girls' bed. As Sue was changing into her jumpsuit, Trina came running into the bedroom shouting, "Someone is coming!" They both darted into the dusty pile of toys under the bed. Debbie and her mother came into the apartment, and with them were a man and a small dog. The dog followed the girl into her bedroom and started sniffing around near the bed. Trina tried to move farther back under the bed, but the dog heard her movement, pushed under the bed, grabbed Trina, and ran out of the apartment through the open door. The people were in the kitchen and didn't seem to notice the dog had gone out the door. Sue climbed out of the window onto the fire escape and could see the dog turn from the street into a park. Sue climbed down the fire escape to Siberia, hopping up on the skateboard, and steered Siberia down the street to the park. When she entered the park, Sue could see the dog in the moonlight digging in the dirt by the side of the creek. She unhooked Siberia from the skateboard and hid behind a tree. Sue hoped once the dog was done burying Trina he would leave, but he didn't. He laid down next to the pile of dirt, looking around warily, guarding his buried prize. While Sue was trying to think of some way to distract the dog long enough to dig up Trina, Siberia streaked past Sue, heading straight for the dog. Siberia ran past the dog, who immediately jumped up to chase after her. Sue quickly began sweeping dirt away with a shovel fashioned from a tool on her belt and uncovered Trina. Trina had gotten sand and dirt in her joints while struggling to escape the dog and could barely move. Sue helped her down to the creek where she could rinse off some of the dirt. Both Trina and Sue were built watertight, so water would not hurt them. Sue rinsed Trina off as best she could, but there was still sand caught deep in Trina's joints, hampering her movement, which would cause permanent damage if Trina swiveled her joints too much. While trying to figure out what best to do, they heard a small voice ask, "Do you need help?" Sue and Trina both turned around to face where the voice was coming from, and in the early dawn light they saw a small figure like themselves. "My name is Ed," said the small figure. "There's a small group of others like me some way up the creek. I can help you get there where we can flesh out this one's joints." As Sue and Ed were walking along the creek to Ed's camp, carrying Trina between them, Siberia came trotting up behind. Ed was fearful, but Sue told him Siberia was their friend and had been helping them. It didn't take long before they reached the place where Ed and the small band of other androids had made camp. They followed a faint, narrow path through the bushes to a small clearing. As they entered the clearing, they saw 3 more androids, 2 like themselves, another male, a female, and a much older model which did not resemble a human. The other male was named Lycone, the female was named Tish, and they called the other one Ziff. Ziff was basically a black box on 4 wheels with 2 mechanical arms in front and 1 retractable arm in back. They took Trina, flushed out her joints with some pure distilled water, dropped in a little oil, and she was as good as new. Sue told them all briefly how she came to be in their time, found Trina, and ended up by the side of the creek. She asked how they, who were also surely not from this time, came to be there. Ed explained, "Tish, Ziff, and I all entered this time the same way you 2 did, though at different locations throughout the city. We were all found by a scientist named Lugita. She took us to her large house some miles up the creek and put us to work in the laboratory she has there." Tish said, "During the years we spent as Lugita's captives, we found out she used to work in the biggest science lab in the city, but got fired because she used their lab for her own experiments and wouldn't share the results with her employers. When Lugita's father died, he left her the big house and enough money to build her own lab in the attic. 10 years ago, continuing with the experiments she began while working at the science lab to create artificial gravity for space travel, she accidentally created a small time portal in the lab. She had been trying to condense massive amounts of matter particles to a density small enough to fit into a spacecraft so it could be used as a source of gravity." Ed went on to explain. "Eventually the time portal began moving, just around the lab at first, but then to other places throughout the city. Lugita could track its movements by measuring certain waves it emitted. Lugita would go to where the time portal moved to observe what, if anything, happened. During one of these early trackings, a small android came through the porthole. That android was me. Lugita took me back to her lab. At first, I misunderstood her intention and thought she was trying to help me. Together, we figured out that I had come from the exact same spot 300 years in the future. I asked Lugita to return me to my own time. She said she didn't know how to do that just then, but if I would stay and work with her in the lab, she would try to figure out a way." "Yeah, as if Lugita would ever try to help anyone besides herself," sneered Tish. "When I got there a year later, Ed was still working for her in the lab." Ed said, "By then, I knew that though Lugita may have been trying to find a way to send things into the future, she did not want to send me. I was too valuable to her as a lab assistant." Ed and Tish told Sue and Trina that during the first year of tracking the time portal, Lugita found that it had one quirky pattern of returning to the same spot once, precisely 13 days after it first appeared at that spot. Other than that, where and when it moved seemed to be random. In time, other androids came through the portal, including Ziff, and finding them to be highly skilled, Lugita put them to work in her lab. Because we don't breathe air, the fumes from the toxic chemicals used in her experiments don't harm us as they would Lugita, and because of our small hands and enhanced vision, we can make precise measurements," said Tish. "Lugita worked us as if we were slaves, only letting us rest to recharge," said Ed with a shudder. "It's sometimes very hard to keep going." Though the fumes from the toxic chemicals didn't harm them, they could be harmed by the chemicals coming into contact with their skin. Ed had a horrible scar on his leg from where a caustic chemical accidentally spilled on him. Android skin does regenerate, repaired from the inside by nanobots contained in an android circulatory system, but the repaired place doesn't exactly match the surrounding older skin, leaving a scar of sorts. "Lycone was lucky," said Ed. "Lugita never found him. Tish found him one night after we escaped while scavenging in a nearby neighborhood." Lycone said, "The time portal moves from place to place very quickly. Within 5 minutes of its arrival, it has moved on to somewhere else. When I finally accepted that I couldn't get back through the way I had come, I just started wandering around the city, and that's how Tish found me." Ed, Tish, and Ziff escaped together from the lab about 2 years before. "We just couldn't take it anymore," said Tish in a weary voice. "Lugita said she found a way to transport us back to our own time and kept promising us that once certain work was done or when more androids came to replace us, she would send us back. But as time passed, more androids were captured, experiments were finished, and new ones begun, but Lugita never released anyone. We could see that Lugita never performed any experiments involving sending anything through the portal from this time, only coming through from the future. It became obvious Lugita never intended to send us back. Though the androids hadn't planned an escape, one day an escape opportunity presented itself. They spent all their time either locked in a plexiglass cube in the lab where the chemical work was done, or locked in a recharge box in another room. That day, when Lugita moved Ed, Tish, and Ziff from the recharge box to the lab, her doorbell rang. She rushed out of the lab, locking the door behind her as usual. After she left, Tish noticed one of the windows high up near the ceiling was open. They managed to climb up and out, bringing Ziff along with them. Ziff didn't seem to really care one way or another where it was, but they couldn't leave it behind. The other androids were still in the recharge box, but there was no way then to free them as well. Ed and Tish made a camp about 5 miles down the gully from Lugita's house, always intending to go back and free the others. Based on what they had observed while working in Lugita's lab, Ed and Tish told Sue that they thought it would now be possible for all of them to exit the present time and get back to their own time through the portal when it moved back to the place Sue came through. They had only 10 days left until that happened. That should give them enough time to attempt to free the rest of the androids from Lugita's lab, and 5 minutes should be enough time for all of them to get through the portal before it moved on to somewhere else.